Hey everyone, Walter Crosby with Healy Sales Development, your host of Sales and Cigars. Today is our series of how to think about sales with my buddy Nate Tutas. And Nate and I, we've sort of structured this series. We're going to start a new process that we're going to go through. And it's based on the last episode where we talk about the formula of performance equals potential minus interferences. And we're going to, this series is going to help CEOs and entrepreneurs, right, who are managing a leadership team and they're managing other people within the organization. It's going to help you understand how to identify these interferences and how to deal with them. It's going to help the sales manager. It's going to help the senior sales leader, right? It's going to help anybody that's got a group of people. It might even help you with being a parent, right? So we're going to help you identify those interferences, how to listen, where those interferences are external and they're internal. We're going to talk about a coaching model as we go through this. So it's going to be a interesting series. They're going to be bite-sized pieces. So go grab a cocktail, grab a cigar, strap in for another impactful episode of Sales and Cigars. So Nate, welcome back to Sales and Cigars on our series on how to think about sales.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I think we missed an episode when one of us was traveling, but we'll make this up. I think we got a good plan for a series of thinking here. I want to say my voice is not intentionally set up here to do this late night FM DJ voice that Chris Voss talks about. I just have a bit of a head cold that's lodged in my throat. So excuse the more baritone sound than normal. It vibrates in my head. It's weird. It has this resonance in my noggin. So I digress. So let's kind of review what we talked about last time with the inner game, the formula. I'm going to let you kind of lay that out, and then we'll jump to the next piece.
Yeah, so in our last episode, in our last conversation where we were talking about thinking about sales, we were really talking about the performance formula that I think it's Tim Galloway identifies in the book, The Inner Game of Tennis, right? And that's one of the original books on coaching. And what he identifies in there is a very, very simplistic formula around performance and how we unlock people's potential. And that is performance equals potential minus interferences. So the more interferences that get in the way, the less potential that's actually released from the individual. So the way that we can actually work to help subordinates, employees, whatever you want to refer to them as, anybody that we work with around, I mean, like you and I were talking about earlier, Walter, it can apply to being a parent with a child. It can apply to being a boss with an employee, a friend, any of those things is helping to identify what things are interferences, what's creating the interference, and then helping to remove that interference and get it out of the way so that you can unlock that potential and thereby increase performance. So that was really what we had talked about. A quick summation of our last conversation was really about that performance model and, performance equaling potential minus interferences.
And that book encouraged people to go read. It goes a little more in depth. It's focused around tennis, but it's not in reality. It applies to the bigger picture, and the same thing that happens in tennis happens in golf. It happens in sales. It happens in just daily life of trying to get better. So there's lots of stories in there and lots of techniques part of it. And
to that point, there's probably, I don't know, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12 different versions of that book now, of the inner game of tennis, the inner game of golf, the inner game of management, the inner game of business, there's a whole, if you just search the inner game on Amazon, you're going to come up with a plethora of different versions
and derivative of the original, and try to make the right analogies and metaphors. But I think that's our objective here, is for people to see how this applies to business, from whether you're CEO or director or VP. We all have people that we are responsible to manage and support in one way or the other. And that usually requires us to manage and coach. And those are two different activities. And we're going to focus on this next few episodes here to talking about what that looks like. So, and I think we'll, down the road here, we'll get into things like grow model for as a way of coaching. There's lots of tools out there to apply. That's a very common one. We'll start to discuss that in the few episodes, but let's look at the two ways we can describe interference that will help people recognize, and then we can pick one and move forward with that for today's episode.
Yeah, so there's, I mean, at its most simplistic form, right? There's two different types of interferences. There's internal interferences, the voices inside our heads, the thoughts that we have, the things we tell ourselves, the beliefs, those kinds of things. And then there's the external interferences, right? And it doesn't mean, when we say external interference, it doesn't mean it's an actual unstoppable thing that cannot get past. It's something that is blocking the person's potential, right? The example that you and I were discussing about just before we came on air was the salesperson who thinks that they don't have the right people to call on because they don't have a list of some sort, right? And sometimes that's an external interference because it's just the salesperson not knowing where to look or not knowing who to get that list from. And there's already someone that has that list, or someone who's responsible for providing that list to the salesperson. And that needs to be developed. So
It could
it's not
almost be a
necessarily, it's just
combination
identifying.
sometimes, but that's part of the role in the coaching, is to help them delineate the difference. And sometimes they may think it's external, but it's really in an internal head trash kind of a deal. And so
Yep.
those are the two, the things that are outside of our influence. And we're not talking about, somebody coming in and knocking all the crap off your desk and, you got to go clean up a mess and then go get back to your job. We're talking about real things that can get in the way of being successful, that are systemic problems within an organization, right? That's the context we're talking about. I mean, if you're playing tennis and you got a broken string, it's an external problem on your racket. It's broken. We could fix that by going to grab our backup racket. So where would you want to start? The internal head trash stuff that people have conversations with, or you want to go with the external?
Well, I think the first thing that we need to kind of talk through is, before we even get to that, I think that one of the biggest things is, if you're in a role where you have some level of leadership, whether you're CEO, director, VP, line manager, whatever. If you're in one of those roles, have you made it part of your cadence, right? Part of your daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly cadence to identify what are the interferences that are either holding your team back, right? If you're the CEO and you've got a bunch of executives that are reporting up to you, are you identifying things that are interfering for them? Or are you identifying things that are holding their team back, right? Someone that reports to you, do they have it as part of their cadence to be identifying interferences for their team members and who they coach and who they manage? Because if that isn't part of the cadence, if that isn't something that you're looking at on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly basis, then that's how we end up going from January to June, or January to now September, and going, we had all these goals, we had all these objectives, and it just feels like we're spinning our wheels. It just feels like we're not getting to where it is that we need to go. And going back to the performance model, the performance formula, if you really want to increase performance in an organization, having a focus around identifying those interferences and constantly working to knocking those things down, getting those things out of the way so that you can unlock the potential within your staff and whatnot, is how you really increase and accelerate the growth, moving forward. So I think that's probably the first thing to start with, is having that be part of your strategic approach to your thinking. Every time you're thinking about those conversations that you're having, is, am I thinking about this in a way that helps to identify an interference that could potentially be stopping this person, whether internal or external, and then helping them to unlock
So
that potential and move forward.
you praised it as cadence. So if you're a
Mhm.
sales manager, you might have 4 weekly meetings that are on the calendar. Like, that's your cadence where you do one-on-ones with your salespeople. And one time you're looking at accountability meeting to look at, did we hit our numbers? Do we have a pipeline to support that? We get good hygiene. Are we doing the right things, right? So that's your first cadence. Your next one could be a right, a little bit deeper dive into the sales projects that we're working on, and which ones have we advanced, which ones have we brought in, which ones are new, what's changed, right? And then maybe you have, and I'm just doing in no particular order. Although I think the accountability one
Mm-hmm.
at the beginning of the month is something where it needs to be, and then you might have this conversation where it feels different, but we're looking for the interference. Maybe that's your third week of the month where you really focus on that as a sales manager with your salespeople, because that becomes, if you don't solve those issues, that salesperson spins and gets stuck. So if you're a leader, if you're the
Mm-hmm.
CEO, or if you're a director level and you have 2-3 levels below you that you're responsible for, maybe that doesn't need to be monthly. Maybe that needs to be quarterly. Um, so how do they decide the cadence of that? If you're a leader, if you're on the leadership team reporting to the CEO.
Well, I think anytime that you're talking about getting closer to a metric that you're tracking, right? Getting closer to a KPI that you're actually working towards. So whether that's a basic meeting that we're saying, hey, it's the ops team and we're getting together to figure out whatever the challenge might be from the ops side of things, whether it's getting deliveries in on time, anything like that. You want to be going into that with the mindset of what could actually be interfering with the team right now, right? And the higher up the organization you go, the more esoteric some of those things become, right? Which is why you've got additional models that you can start layering on, like Patrick Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team, right? And you start looking at, well, where is this? Is it a matter of trust? That's really the interference that we need to be addressing within the team. My team members, my fellow executives don't trust each other. They're not willing to be vulnerable with each other. So you can start looking at different layers, but I think that's where I was saying kind of the daily, weekly, monthly. I think it has to be part of every one of those conversations. It has to kind of become part of the daily diet, so to speak, of when you're having that conversation, making sure that you at least have the mindset. And again, this whole series is about thinking about sales, right? So it's how you're thinking as you're approaching it. So depending on the context of the meeting, right, it's going into it going, okay, so when I'm going into this meeting and I'm listening to what's being said, I'm going to be listening for what are some of those things that are holding you back, right? What are the things that are stopping you from being able to do what it is that we're actually looking to accomplish? And whatever the topic is of that particular meeting, being the sounding board as the leader, where you're the one that typically is going to have more experience, or at least have the greater amount of knowledge or authority in the meeting to be able to say, hey, let's do this, let's do that. Have you considered this? Have we considered that? And being able to identify those things can then help you to take that and determine, is that something that we solved in this meeting, or do I need to have a one-on-one with that person if it's an internal example that I've identified, or things of that
So
nature?
there's no hard and fast rules. But we should be looking for these opportunities on a regular basis. I think that's the big takeaway there. Coaching has a lot to do with knowing when to speak, and the tendency should be to listen and be that person who's leaning in, trying to make sure they understand, letting that person share their thoughts and ideas, and help them sometimes crystallize them, right? That's a piece of it. And asking the right
Mm-hmm.
questions at the right time. And there's tons of books written about, the types of questions we ask at the right time. But I think we're trying to, if a leader in whatever capacity is actually listening to what the person says, that gives them the opportunity to know to turn left, go straight, go deeper, put a hold on that and say, that's something that we need to focus on in a one-on-one, or that's not for this meeting. Lencioni's model, it's like, that's not the conversation that this meeting's about. That's a different elevation of our different meetings. So
Mm-hmm.
we can't keep that turbulence going. So the cadence,
Yep.
we have some flexibility but we should always be looking for interference and being able to tag that and not lose it.
Yeah, and to be fair, one of the reasons that a lot of your top companies have coaches and why it's becoming so prevalent to have a coach working within a business is because they can be that outside influence that literally is there to listen and identify where the interferences are and then jump in and help when needed. Because a lot of times that does get difficult. We get like horses with blinders on, where we're so focused on the task at hand and what it is that we're trying to accomplish that we miss the fact that, to use an example that comes up more times than not, you've got a bunch of executives at a table and one person is quiet through almost the entire conversation. And that person never really gets addressed. That happens a lot of times. And sometimes that's just shyness, it's personality. Sometimes that's frustration and anger and whatever else that's being held inside that person doesn't want to speak up because someone else is, dominating the conversation or whatever that is. But that in and of itself can erode different things within a team if you're really trying to build team cohesion and, increase performance in a team. So sometimes having those outside influences can be good, but anytime we as the leader can try to fill that role as much as possible, to be paying attention and looking out for those interferences, to be listening, and then interject when needed, to ask questions, to dive deeper, the greater the performance and the ability to remove some of those interferences can be.
Hey, thanks for being part of the Sales and Cigar community. I wanted to share that I wrote a book, The 7 Critical Mistakes CEOs Make with Their Sales Organization. The CEOs who've read it tell me I cut to the chase quickly, get to the point, explain exactly what they're experiencing, why they're experiencing it, and how to fix it. So if you want a free copy, go check out the link in the show notes. Now let's get back to the interview.
So what I'm hearing there, Nate, is that if we're a leader, we should pay attention to the dynamic in the room. We need to pay attention to who's trying to persuade everybody else. And once that person has spoken, then we need to be able to get the feedback from the other people, especially the ones who are reluctant, who might disagree. And we need to create that level of trust in that room to be able to say this, we're here open and honest communication. And as long as we do that in a professional and polite manner, it's okay to say, I disagree. And here's why. And then we have that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And if people's feelings get hurt about that, then that's an interference that we need to address with that individual, probably individually, but that's something that we have to lay that groundwork. So let everybody know. So paying attention to the room, listening to the constituents really in the room there that are participating, whether you're a CEO or a sales manager and you have all the salespeople in the room, right? We got to be able to make sure that everybody feels heard and that there's a consistent sharing from everybody. And I think being heard
Mm-hmm.
is Lencioni's word that we need to bring that to the party. So, because there you're going to have internal and external interferences and being able to recognize those. So, is there any hard and fast rules around how we address, external influences need to be dealt with in a group setting, or they need to be dealt with individually, systemically? Like, do you have any feelings about that? We're talking in a sales context.
If we're talking specifically in a sales context, this is where in my opinion, this is where a lot of leadership style comes into play, right? Some leaders want things out in the open. They want to have those conversations. They want people to know, hey, if you decide to speak up and your ego gets in the way, I'm going to call you out and make sure that everybody knows, that's not okay to do, right? If you're shy and you're holding back and whatever, I'm going to call you out because I want people to know, that you need to speak up and that I want people engaged within the meetings and things like that. That kind of comes down to that leadership style. At the same time, your leadership style might be to handle those things behind closed doors, so to speak, and to have some of those conversations. And it could be a blending of both, right? So a prime example that I'll pull from the sports world, there's Manchester United has a player right now that last year was given like 3 months during the season to go away and deal with issues. No one knows what the issues are. No one knows if they were mental, if they were health, whatever they were, but he was given time to go away. And the manager was a brand new manager that just, to the media, whenever people would ask about him, he would just say, no, Player's dealing with it. He'll be back when he's back. We'll tell you more when we know more type thing, right? So they handled it internally. Well, at the most recent match that they had this past weekend, that player was actually left completely out of the lineup, not even on the team, not on the bench, any of that. The manager was asked about it in the press conference afterwards. They said, where's this player? And he said, well, the player wasn't performing in practice. He wasn't performing to the standard and the level that we have set. And we've told him repeatedly, if you don't perform to this standard, you will not play on this team. And so he wasn't in the team. Pretty simple, pretty cut, pretty dry. Then about 20 minutes, that player went on Twitter and made a public post saying, don't believe everything you read. I respect my coaches. I respect my teammates, but they're lying. I'm being a scapegoat. I practice my butt off, blah, blah, blah. And completely. So there's been all kinds of drama around this situation. That was an example of there's clearly an interference there. They tried to keep it internal. That coach got to a point where he said, I'm going to go public with this to see if that kind of pushes the player over the edge a little bit. And it clearly has backfired in one way or another, whether
or
that
it did,
backfires
or it
for the
didn't.
player
It
or for
was
the coach.
he got
We don't know
exactly
at this
what he wanted to motivate him to move out.
Right. And that could be the other alternative. So I think to answer your question of, is there kind of like a clear-cut way? I think this is where those fuzzy lines come into play of leadership style and how your personality comes out as you lead.
So I think that's a really good point too. When we're building a team, whether it be a sales team or a leadership team, that team needs to be able to support the leader's strengths and weaknesses. And every leader has them. Some leaders that might be real soft and fuzzy and want everybody to, feel good and sing kumbaya. That leader's going to need somebody on the team to stir the pot every once in a while and call things out to help. All professionally and politely, but that might be there might be a person on that team that needs to do that. And vice versa. There might be somebody to help tamp that down a little bit. And I don't think it's right and wrong. It's everybody has a style, and we all have opinions. That we brought up parenting before, right? There's beliefs around parenting, what we should and shouldn't do, and those are pretty strong in parents. It's the outcomes that we're looking for. We're talking in a business setting here. Are we getting the outcomes? Are these interferences causing us to not perform at the level that we should? What's getting in the way? And I think that is a really good spot for us to be able to. I want you to kind of help wrap this up, but I think having that simple formula to recognize these are the things that we go after, and they're broken into smaller buckets, and how we do that becomes the complex and the nuance. And lots of models to do it, but we need to do it. We need to address those things, not sweep them under the rug, and not make a bigger thing out of something that isn't, right? We don't need drama on these teams. And from sales, we want to root out mediocrity. We want to root out people that can't play nice on a team, right? That, everybody's competitive and everybody wants to win. But, if you should be happy for somebody when they score a big win, even if that puts them over you that month, you should be happy for them because it's a win for the team. And those are things that there's personal internal interferences there. So that we have to be looking for as that sales manager. We got to be paying attention. So if we want to land it there, what else would you add to that to wrap that up? And we can look forward to the next conversation because there's lots there to unpack.
Well, so I think, so one thing I think I'll add, and you and I didn't necessarily intend to be talking about specific leadership styles and things like that, but part of being able to identify interferences, both internal and external, is knowing your own leadership style and how that plays out in your team. And I'll give a real life example that I actually experienced myself when I was younger in my sales career and I was being hired. And I had interviewed with a company and I got interviewed by two managers from two different divisions. And it turned out that both managers had open sales positions, right? And they both interviewed me. And luckily, I performed well in the interview and both of them ended up wanting to hire me. And the moment I got hired, I knew personally I would have performed better on the other manager's team. And it didn't have to do with anything about how much I liked the manager who hired me or anything like that. I actually love the guy. I'm still in touch with him to this day. He's a great guy. If he hears this, he probably knows who he is and whatnot. phenomenal individual, but he had a very soft leadership style. He had the leadership style of he was going to put his arm around you and be your buddy and all that kind of stuff. I was pretty close to being fresh out of the Marine Corps. I wasn't just out of the Marine Corps, but I was pretty close. And the other manager was more of a hard nose, held you, tight to the numbers, and you performed or you were not going to be on his team type person. Right. And I knew that leadership style I would have done better in. Now, it ended up working out well for me because I had enough conscious awareness to say, okay, I'm not going to be getting that from this particular manager. So I actually went out and got me a coach to hold me tight to those numbers, and I performed well in those roles. But that wasn't any result of the company. That was a result of me being able to identify that. Had they looked at it not from, well, who wants to fill the position, but who would this individual actually perform better under based on leadership style and the ability to get the best out of this individual, I would have ended up on the other team, right, inside that organization. But it was looked at purely from your position's been open longer
but
than mine, so
I'm
we'll
going
have you
to
fill it.
go out on a limb and say I think that's a mistake. It's not about how long a position's been open and in need of that. I'm afraid that's a fear-based decision. I think, where is this candidate gonna, if there are two positions and they're two different styles, where's this gonna land? And I think that's part of the conversation. Like when I hire people that I'm going to manage, I tell them what I'm looking for. I tell them my style. I tell them what they can expect. And some of them like, really? Like, that's what you do? And I'm like, yeah, I'm like an old football coach. You're going to have my loyalty if you're doing your work. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt if you're working hard and trying to do things. If you slack off and you're lazy, you're running laps, right? In a proverbial sense. I don't want people I got to babysit. And that's why it takes me a little longer to find the right people, because I'm not looking for mediocre. I'm looking for somebody that I can help elevate, that they recognize that there's some challenges, or they get up and like get excited about something that, that there's an internal problem within a systemic problem within the company, and they jump up and down and scream and shout about it. I can respect that, right? I got to help them manage the emotion, but I respect the fact that they want to win, and whoever's in their way, they're gonna make it uncomfortable for them. So I think it's a long-winded way of saying, I think that's the responsibility of the company. If you got a young Marine, you don't want him, the guy that's going to be hugging him all the time. He's going to need, some stricter discipline and no nonsense. And, at the end of the day, you're going to do what you particularly are going to do what you need to do to win, period. So, which you did, and it worked. So I think we landed there, and this whole series is going to be about how to coach. And we're going to help sales managers who don't have that skill set. We're going to help them with understanding what it is they should be doing, why they should be doing it. We're going to help them with the how. But this all applies to the CEO and that higher level executive, that these principles apply. And we're going to try to go bounce back and forth there, I think, right? We'll use soccer examples from time to time. And we'll use proper football examples from time to time. Anything else we want to?
I think we could argue the definition of proper football. But
we could. We probably won't, but we could. And I think, anything else you want to add to that? Because I'm excited about this series, setting this up.
I think the only thing that I would add is almost imploring, right? Almost begging on my knees, to make identifying interferences part of the cadence, right? Part of sitting back as the leader, listening for those things of what's getting in my team's way, right? If you think about CEO, and I've heard a billion different ways of changing that acronym, right? But if we take the original acronym of Chief Executive Officer, right? If you take executive, it's Chief Execution Officer. It's the one who helps to be able to execute things within the company, right? And so if you look at what is preventing my team from being able to execute on this task or this goal or this objective or whatever it is, and then having it be your role of identifying the things that are preventing them from executing, and then helping them to eliminate those roadblocks, right? That becoming the role, and then following that all the way down. I'll use military terminology, but following that all the way down the chain of command to the frontline sales manager that's working with his team and having the conversations with them to say, what are you doing to identify the interferences in your team, right? What's preventing them from executing on their goal, on their objective, on whatnot, and how can I help to support you in that, if that's the way the company's structured?
I think that's the thing we're going to talk about. But that one idea of listen, look for the interference, and then take some action to support those people internally and externally. I mean, it's really, if we were going to break it down to as simple as building blocks, that's it. And it ties back to the formula. So I think this is something that you're gonna want to maybe go back and listen to some of these conversations from time to time and think about it. There's plenty of books. We're going to reference different books along the way. We referenced a couple already today. I'm excited, Nate, as always. Thank you for the insights, and we'll leave it there for today. Thank you.
Sounds good. Cheers.
Hey, thank you for being part of the Sales and Cigars community. I want to take a quick second to share that I'm doing a free sales hiring challenge this month. I'm going to give you everything you need to hire sales superstars and avoid the sales duds. Check out the link in the show notes to be able to sign up for free.